design for the BBC. And I just have a little question. How many of you watched the Olympics last summer? Okay, just out of interest, how many of you didn't watch the Olympics last summer? Ah, interesting. So we have a fair number of a particular audience type in here that I'll talk about a little later. And one other thing is, of those of you who did watch the Olympics last summer, how many of you watched it online, some or part of it? Okay, great. So one of the challenges and pleasures of today for me is going to be that so many of you have already experienced the work that I'm going to talk about, and you may have your own views, so that'll be interesting. So I'm going to tell you a bit about our offer for what we're calling the first ever fully digital Olympics. I'm going to talk about the industry context in which we built it, we designed it, what our offer was, and some of the key design challenges, how our work was received by real people, and most importantly, what lessons we learned and how we're taking them into our next steps. So let's start off with the industry context. So I think Andy will be happy that we have the bird's nest, the image of the bird's nest here. He referred to it earlier, apparently same architects of this building. But this is a point of reminder to me to talk about how far we've come in terms of the digital landscape in the past 4 years. So if you think back to Beijing, there were no tablets then. There were no apps. There were no, internet-enabled televisions. And the experience of watching live video on mobiles was pretty crap. So we've come a long, long way, and that was a key part of our offer, was making sure to offer choice to everybody on a multitude of devices. So another thing that was different from the Olympics in Beijing was just that we at BBC had just tremendous access to the content. We had full rights for all of the video content. So, and we decided we were going to use all of it online. So that was 4 times the coverage that we had in Beijing. 24 live high-definition streams, 2,500 hours of coverage, and we delivered this all across 4 screens: tablet, mobile, desktop PC, and internet-enabled TVs. So 7 years ago, back in 2005, when London won the bid for the 2012 Olympics, we started to look at how we could push the boundaries in terms of what we could achieve for London 2012. And we had 3 really clear goals that we held as kind of our North Star through the process of developing the offer. One of them was truly comprehensive coverage. Another was to let audiences have control of where and when they watched it. And another was to use London 2012 as an opportunity to really set the standard for big event coverage, the new digital standard for big event coverage. So let me get straight to what our offer was. So we wanted to give the audience choice, as I mentioned before. Choice to watch what they wanted, when they wanted, on all of these devices. And the notion of never missing a moment became a really important mantra to us. And in fact, it was one that I believe was developed within the design team. And then eventually made its way into the public-facing messages, the marketing messages about the offer. We wanted to make sure that people never missed a moment, including really important moments like that one, the 100 meters men's final. So whether they were on their desktop in the office catching up on action during lunch, or whether they were catching up on mobile on the bus ride home, or whether people were watching with their family at home on telly, or on IPTV, or whether they were in bed catching up by a tablet, continuing their watching by a tablet. We just wanted to give them ultimate control. So the, okay, great. Mobile was a huge part of our offer as well, a huge part of our ambition. So we built a mobile-optimized browser experience, and then from that, we used that to spin up a BBC Olympics app. And I'm just curious, again, just to poll the audience, how many of you downloaded either the Apple iOS or the Android app for the Olympics? Okay, a fair number of you, great. So you knew what that experience was like. We also had a pretty rich mobile offering. Every athlete in the country had their own page with medal tallies and news stories and that kind of thing. Minute-by-minute live text commentary, comprehensive schedule and results in mobile, and most importantly, thousands of hours of live video, both in terms of live, but also we also had a lot of catch-up video, lots of hours of stackable highlights, clips to catch up with. So that was part of our offer. But the main experience, the full fat version of our experience, was on desktop. And one of the things that we did was we used the opportunity of all this incredible quantity of live coverage to really try to push the boundaries of what we did with live on the desktop. And that was made manifest in the interactive video player. And I'll let this guy tell you a little bit about it.
This is an Olympics like no other, and we want to make sure you get the most out of this once-in-a-lifetime event. So we've created a live, interactive video player that allows you to watch every moment of the games. So here's how it works. Imagine you're watching the 5,000 metres live, and you decide you want to see the triple jump that was on earlier. All you do is click, and you instantly rewind back to the moment you want to watch. Once you've caught up, jump back to the here and now by clicking on live. You're straight back into the action. And at any time go full screen and the player delivers the action in HD. Then there's the extras button. Click on this and you'll find lots of great information. If you're watching the track cycling and are wondering what the different events are, the sport guide will tell you. Then there's Olympics Live. Turn it on and it will alert you to all the key moments from around the game so you never miss anything that matters. And with the athletes panel, if you're watching the rowing and want in-depth info about one of the rowers, then this feature is here to help. Now there'll be times when up to 24 live events are taking place all at once, so we've arranged everything to make it easy for you to find the best of the action. In short, with the BBC's new live interactive video player, we're giving you complete control of what you want to watch and when you want to watch it. Go to bbc.co.uk/sport to never miss a moment of the Olympic Games on the
BBC. You can see that we were trying to do a lot with the interactive video player, and one of the things I'll talk about a little later is the design challenges and also what we learned in the process of watching people use the interactive video player over the course of the 17-day period of the Olympics. So another part of our offer was the connected television and red button offer. So we have the same 24 streams that were available online and on mobile. Those were available too. So that was our offer. That was basically our offer. Of course, I've left a lot of the detail out, but tons and tons of stuff across all 4 screens. So how do we go about designing for this massive proposition? We really gained a lot of benefit from having some clear design principles, and I mentioned it before, but that notion of giving users choice and control and allowing people to access the content wherever they were and wherever they wanted, so wherever you are, wherever you want it. And this notion of never missing a moment was an incredibly strong mantra throughout the design. It helped us focus, so we asked that question constantly as we were designing. Is this going to help somebody never miss a moment? Is this going to, make sure that we can let people never miss a moment? And we also used it as validation, so it was a particular focus of our user testing and all the kinds of validation testing that we did. So that was a really important part of our design principles. Another thing is, and this is where we get into the demographic, I'd like you to pay attention to these descriptions for a minute and see if you can identify which you are. So, which are you? Are you a sport obsessive, hungry for all sport, especially football, always needs to know what's happening with sport, looks at a variety of sport websites and is a devoted fan? Or are you a general sports fan, someone who follows sport as a hobby or out of habit, interested in lots of different sports but follows up online when bored or has free time? Are you a main eventer, sport not a big part of your life, but follow major events, no interest in following a sport until there's a big event? Or are you, and you've already identified yourselves in the audience, a sport rejecter? So I'm just curious with a show of hands, who amongst you are sport obsessives? Who recognize that? Oh, very few. Okay, what about general sports fans? Much larger amount. What about main eventers? Okay, so you, and then we know the rejectors, so yeah, and so there's a small number of you as well. So this audience here basically represents the proportions of the kind of audience that we had coming to the site. So we knew that even though the Olympics was being hosted in the BBC Sports site, and that we had a core fan base of more sport obsessives and general sports fans, we really need to make sure that we made it super simple and clear for main eventers who weren't familiar with the site. And that was a key driving force in the design. So, so this focus on the main eventer really became key for us. So another design challenge, so I've talked about the design principles, and now I want to talk about some of the key design challenges, and there were tons. I mean, we had so many different aspects of the design that we were doing simultaneously, and et cetera, but I just thought I would focus on 3 key ones to bring this case study to life. So one of the design challenges was, of course, designing for multiple devices. It was really important, of course, that it was a joined up and coherent proposition, and people understood it to be the same proposition. So when you're taking 302 different events, that's part of one major event, and doing that across 4 screens, it could get quite fragmented quite quickly. So it's interesting because the ingredients to doing this well are pretty straightforward, pretty simple actually. They're keeping your visual language consistent, using similar or the same interaction patterns across platforms so that they're recognizable and people start to understand that it's going to behave in the same way. Doing a full-fat version of an offer for desktop and a more streamlined version for mobile that's more aware of the context of use of mobile devices. So you've all heard these ideas before. They're not rocket science, but it may be simple and straightforward. It's incredibly hard to execute. It takes a lot of skill, a lot of hard work, and a lot of just plain logistical coordination to get it to happen. It's also the kind of thing that you can't readily test for in the end result, like, did everybody think it was coherent or not? But you can get a sense that if people found things easy to use, that you've done your job well. So we did also, in this designing for, we had a bunch of hypotheses, I think would be the right thing to say, about how people were going to use the different devices. And they were pretty well-founded hypotheses based on watching patterns of usage over the course of previous live events, even up through Wimbledon, right before the games. But they were hypotheses in the end, and so it was very interesting for us to watch during that 17 days what actually happened, and I'll share some of those insights with you in a moment. So another massive design challenge was the interactive video player. So the main thing about this was how do we allow the main content that people are really here to see, watching great athletes do amazing things, sing, and making sure that we were offering people added value without distracting from that main, compelling experience. And one of the things that we did, and this gets back to this notion of consistent design patterns across platforms, was we focused on the notion of the carousel, which you just saw, as an interaction pattern. We prioritized what's on now, or what was on now, if you see what I mean, and displayed that first, and then the timeline showed catch-up content to the left and content coming up on the right. The other thing about the design of this was that it needed to, as you saw when the flash of the carousel, actually, I might try to play this again. Is that going to work? Whoops, no, went ahead. And the carousel goes again. you'll see that we had to design it flexibly enough that it could accommodate up to 23 streams simultaneously, because that, at the peak of the games, was how many we had to do simultaneously. But it also needed to be able to scale down elegantly to only 3 streams, which there were certain moments in the game where there were that many. So this is what we came up with, but that was a real challenge. So I'll skip ahead then. Another design challenge that we had for the Olympics, but I would say that we have more generally at the BBC all the time, and I reckon that a bunch of you in this room share this design challenge with us, and that is designing for abundance. So it's how do you take like a rich treasure chest of stuff that you know people are interested in, there's no lack of interest in this content, and how do you give them access to it in a meaningful, clear way? So that problem of design for abundance is one that we're continually challenged by and really, and inspired by, I should say. So we're passionate about that challenge, and we continue to want to hack away at it, see what we can learn about that challenge, and see what we can bring into the next thing that we do. And nowhere was it more evident that this was a challenge than in the schedule. So we knew from our experience with the previous Olympics that the schedule was a key part of the audience's experience, what they wanted from us. They wanted to be able to plan their day. And we focused very much on the day. We took a bet on that, the day ahead. In order to do this, again, across 302 different events and all the different sport and all the different days, etc., one of the people in the team described it as like playing a game of 3D chess. So it was a really complicated process, or design challenge. So during the games, as I said, we first displayed what's on today and provided specific links to sports from those pages. And we optimized for 2 key questions. One was, what's on today and what's happening right now? And when is a sport that I'm interested in taking place? So those are the 2 things we optimized. And it's interesting, you'll see a little later when I talk about what we learned about a question we might want to add to that list for Rio in 2016. So those were some of the design challenges, that idea of designing for abundance, the design challenges that were inherent to the interactive video player and allowing all this rich data to hopefully enhance the people's experience of the video. And then also the design for multiple devices. So those were some key ones. So now I want to talk a little bit about how the work was received by real people, what they thought of it. So, and just to say that our ambition at the start was to try to do for the British public, basically, what the coronation did in 1953 for television. We were trying to do for digital. The Olympics should do for digital what the coronation did for TV, and that's bring it into the mainstream. And overall, we managed to do that. It was a success in that. Our coverage drove record-breaking traffic to the BBC Sports site. There were 57 million global browsers to bbc.co.uk, 24.2 million people pressed red, 109 million downloads of our Olympics smartphone app, apparently a sizable portion of this audience, and 12 million requests for video from mobile devices. And all of this led to a staggering 111 million video requests across all platforms. So that's the equivalent of the video output, as you can see, of a typical TV channel for this many years. So, I mean, imagine the world before online distribution, how inconceivable this would be. So it was hugely popular, and people came to the service in droves, and they used it. They used it with anger. Actually, they used it with joy, which was one of the great things about being in London during the Olympics. I should have asked that question too. How many of you were in London during the Olympics? And then the other parts of the audience reaction. What was their overall feeling? This is a slide of a mix of stats, some about the BBC's coverage overall, that 96%, for example, feeling the BBC's coverage met or exceeded their expectations. But also, for BBC Online specifically, we managed to reach 65.2% of the UK online adult population. I don't know of many other services that can claim that. And then this one was really important to us because of that goal to be a bit like the coronation was for telly, to the mainstreaming of digital. 32% said our online coverage encouraged them to use new services. So that was really, really encouraging for us. And you know, in practically every way that we could think to ask the audience how we were doing, they came back with a resounding brilliant. Now, obviously, we got some of the reflected glow from the games themselves. I'm not suggesting otherwise. And also, a lot of the reflected glow from the rest of the BBC's coverage, which was, you know, by many accounts, certainly mine, astounding. But these were the kinds of specific mentions we were getting. And these were typical, you know, about the apps. Okay, so I got 5 minutes left, but there's speed up. So we also wanted to do a bit that was more design specific. So we partnered with Experience Lab to look as the games were going on. It was a very short window of time, actually, to really get a sense of how the service is being experienced, to do some field research. And they did diary studies and you know, site visits and all sorts of things to get us some results. So, so even this group, I have to say, you know, I hesitate because I know I'm going to be sounding too self-congratulatory here, and I don't mean to be, but the results were really great. Like, they basically said people could find what they wanted. There was, you know, there weren't massive usability problems. They definitely had some suggestions, and we ourselves knew that we could have done some things better. In some cases, we were constrained by what data we could get and other things like that. But overall, people found it easy to use, even the main eventers who hadn't used the sports site much before. The other thing I should say about the self-congratulatory note, I feel a little less guilty standing up there and sounding that note because I had so little direct responsibility for the design myself. And you know how it is. People like me get to stand up here from stage and talk about it, but there were a bunch of really dedicated, incredibly talented, really hardworking people, and these are some of the core team, many of whom are in this audience, and so you should take an opportunity to meet them, ask questions. In fact, I can see 3 sitting right there. Do you want to raise your hands, guys? So, and I hope if you have any questions, you'll introduce yourself to them during the breaks. Lessons learned. One thing I should say up front about when talking about multiple devices, often we make the mistake of talking about the multiple online devices, and really we should be thinking about it in the broader ecosystem of broadcast overall. And it is important for me to acknowledge that tele is still king. The majority of the people who experience the Olympics experience it on traditional tele. So that is still the case. It's still a favorite way of watching live, especially for big events. And it's also a great way to create community feel, and that's not going away anytime soon. But we had great success with all our platforms. And just to give some insight into how the multiple devices were used, of all of the usage of our sites over the course of the 17 days, 58% of it was via desktop. 32%, and this varied. On the weekends it was more, during the weekdays it was less, was on mobile, as a sort of a strong second to that. As you can see, tablet and IPTV were less, although that, in this case, this chart isn't talking about red button. This graph shows, it's a bit hard to understand at first, but basically, this graph says, okay, if I take mobile, for example, I'll take 100% of the mobile coverage, and how was that mobile coverage, you know, mobile access happening over the course of a day? So we looked at the entire 17 days worth of mobile coverage, and we said, how did that map onto time of day? And so you got this interesting thing where you have, you know, you have some clear things that you would expect. And actually, in some ways, it wasn't surprising. So we felt like the bets that we placed, the hypotheses that we had were basically confirmed by this. You know, tablet usage in the bedroom, for example. That's something we all know about. But interestingly enough, mobile sort of increasing over the course of the day. So it was obvious that people had their mobiles with them 24/7 and were using our apps and mobile sites, you know, in a wide variety of places. So one place that they used it was obviously when out and about, but they were also sometimes using it for text-based catch-ups at the office. So, you know, that discrete thing of like you don't want everybody who is working around you to know that you're on the Olympics constantly all day long, so you do a text catch-up on your mobile phone. And in fact, text-based catch-up was used much more frequently than watching live video via mobile, and that's just because of data costs still. You know, it's the same sort of barrier. The other thing that mobile was used for a lot was second screening, in the way that you would be watching one thing on telly and then you'd be doing something else to do with the Olympics in the same room, but you know, Facebook and Twitter, sport updates, athlete stats, other kinds of information. So, and then just a word about Red Button, because there was a massive success story for Red Button as well. We sometimes forget about Red Button because it feels a bit like a legacy platform. But basically, in London, we had 24.2 million streams, which is 4 times. It was 12% of all the BBC TV viewing was via Red Button, which is kind of a tremendous stat. And this chart happens to be about Red Button, but the same things that you can see in this chart that I'll explain in a second are true of the other platforms that people consumed the video on. So what you're seeing here is stacked totals at any given time during this particular day of what people were watching. And basically, this slide is about the long tail. So if you can see up on the right, football, so you have, like, you know, some people were watching boxing at that time, some people were watching swimming. Football was obviously a big one during that time. But you'll see that, like, you know, boxing, those were preliminary rounds of boxing. So there was a you know, sizable, significant audience watching kind of low-profile stuff. Also, judo's an interesting one over there. Similar thing. So we found that we were catering to a wide range of interest in sport. So that was really great to see. And then just a reminder again of our offer on IPTV before I tell some of that. So we had every sport available live and on demand. Easy switching between up to 24 live streams at any time, ability to pause and rewind live video, ability to jump straight to key moments by chapter markers, alerts for key events, and we had a lot of data. So we had Olympics Live, which were alerts to interesting moments happening elsewhere on a different stream, more about individual athletes, match stats, and sport guides. And sport guides, which I think you saw a little earlier, those little pieces of text that were pretty simply numbered, like 1, this is how this sport, you know, transpires, this is what the judges are looking for, that kind of thing, really simple stuff. They were the runaway success story of this. So, and this is interesting because we didn't have them in the original designs for the interactive video player, and it was out of user testing that we realized that we were missing a trick, introduced them, subsequent rounds of user testing, everybody was like, yes, sport guides. And in the usage that we saw during the games, same thing. People loved the sport guides. I would say that they loved it more than the match stats. And again, that's probably because the majority of the people coming to the site during the games were main eventers. So this is interesting also. The functionality that we offered was really well used. So this shows millions over the course of the day, of the games, I mean, how they use the kind of the functionality of that navigating through the video content. So the timeline was used to scroll back and forward 30 million times during the course of the games. Full screen was entered 25 million times. Chapter markers were clicked a lot, and we found that the labels for chapter markers were particularly important, and that it's not very good to automate them. They're much more successful if you do them manually, which is a headache for when you're planning and budgeting, but nonetheless, as far as the user experience goes, it's a more satisfying experience. And then pausing the live action was another thing that people used a lot. So there was actually a lot of use of these new features, and people seemed to take to them pretty quickly and learn them pretty quickly, which was great. So, so in some ways, the design of the interactive video player is another example of this idea of designing for abundance. Yeah, I mean, it really is another example of that. And what did we learn about it? We learned that people were blown away by the amount of live content we had, but there was so much, and despite our efforts to try to guide them to what they might want, some people still had trouble knowing what and when to watch, and occasionally missed items of interest. So when I'm thinking about this problem, I think about what would my brief be, what will my brief be to the design team for 2016, you know, for Rio in 2016. And the key thing has to be just pushing personal relevance. Pushing personal relevance, pushing personal relevance. It's like, it's the thing that people want as a curation to this vast amount of content. So that could mean friend of a friend of a friend. You know, I know someone who knows that athlete. It could be closest athlete to my neighborhood, but for a broad swath of the audience, it's simply Team GB. I really want to see where Team GB is in medal contention. So by hook or by crook, I'm hoping that by 2016, we'll be able to introduce that into our offer. Speaking of by hook or by crook and next steps, this is a disclaimer. This is something that if you're press, you're not allowed to write about it. And Sophie, my external comms person, sorry. But this is just a sneak preview of some of the stuff that we're thinking about that takes some of these learnings into the work of the next step. So this is a version of how we imagine the next iteration of Live might be. And as you can see, what we've tried to do is, because we really, in the interactive video player, we were like the meanest ass personal trainer when it came to work in the lower third of the video content. We just shoved all this stuff in there. We said, work harder. We were just really trying to max it out. And here we're saying, okay, maybe there's an opportunity to use the rest of the page for that, for some of that heavy lifting. And also, how might we better integrate the live text comments into the overall experience? There's another point I was going to make, but I forgot about that anyway. And about the schedule. So what did we learn about the schedule? We were absolutely right. People did primarily plan just for that day ahead, partly because there was so much on each day. But how did they tend to plan? According to Team GB medal chances. So that's something that I hope we will be doing more and more of. And we're currently planning and thinking about and starting to concept for this notion of live guides that really focus on this personal relevance. Here's another disclaimer, here's another image, and the idea here is that, if you're Team GB, if your team is England, that's what you're going to want to be looking at. So I know that I'm getting the 2 slides left to go. I was going to do a moving clip of the Olympics, but I think I'll say instead that I hope you can see what we did, what we learned, and what we're going to do next. It's incredibly exciting stuff to be working on, and all of us who worked on it felt really proud to work on it. And yeah, if you find any of this interesting, you should definitely talk to us. We're always looking for talented designers who are passionate about this space and can help us push toward abundance in the future. So thank you very much.